We are going to continue our polishing up on some things that we may already know, or point out some things that we may have overlooked. That's why it's always good to revisit things in the Bible, to study, to make sure that your perspective is right, because sometimes we can forget some of the things that we already know. So we're just coming up with not changing anything, but just looking at the Bible, understanding something about religion. The Bible actually talks about two different religions in the book. One of them is the Jewish religion and the other one is Christianity. Okay? They are not the same religion. Okay? And so therefore, when we are studying and talking with people, I want us to make sure that we understand that, because a lot of times we are trying to wrestle with why another religion has done something that they consider to be Christianity. Okay? If you talk to Jehovah's Witness, they will tell you, well, you're not supposed to have blood transfusions. And you're not, so if their child was dying and they needed blood from the parent and the parent blood matched, they wouldn't give it to them, right? Because they believe that the Bible says you're not supposed, and then not supposed to give blood transfusions. And then they want to take their book, because they have a Bible, right? And want to argue the points from their Bible. Now, what I'm telling you is, unless you are actually with, like sometimes you may have a study with a person in leadership, and they want to actually dig into the word, and they want to kind of do a scriptural debate. That's what I call it, a scriptural study. And you're studying with somebody that's different. But all in all, and walking back and forth, and they open their Bible, you don't argue with somebody who is bringing out something that they do in their religion. That's their religion. As Christians, we don't do that. Well, we're Jehovah's Witnesses, okay. So you're doing what Jehovah's Witnesses do, right? So this will cut down the anxiety of going back and forth and trying to prove something that they do in their religion, okay? The same thing in the Bible, we understand, because we know that the Bible is consistent of both Old and New Testament. We may not realize that these are two different religions that was given by the same God. Okay, and that's where it can get tricky. So this is just stuff you already know. 66 books in the Bible. You have the book of the law, right? Historical books, major prophets, minor prophets, and poetry. That's the 5 things that's on your hand. You'll be able to count them all, okay? Brother Tillery, are you already going to the heat? Thank you, brother. I feel like an oven roast. Book of the law. These are all the books of the law, okay? And why is this important for you to know? And you don't get all this at one time. So that if I wanted to learn in the Bible about what Christians are supposed to do, I can go to these books. That's right. Right? If I want to learn about major prophets, you don't go to the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, because they are part of the book of the law. So you got a library, and when you go in the library, you got to find out what book you're looking for. You go into the library, you got fiction and you got nonfiction. You don't look over here for certain books. You go to the category that you are looking for. And so this is in the Old Testament of 66 books. The reason that these are called major prophets and minor prophets had nothing to do with who's better or who's more valuable. It has to do with the major prophets just have more content. It's like they're longer books. So they call them major because they have more pages. That's the only reason. The minor prophets are shorter books. Okay? But they all what? They all prophets. Then you got these books of poetry. Job has poetry written in it, though it seems like it's scripture, right? Psalms, that's a lot of poetry, right? These are songs. We read it as scripture, right? But these are songs. You got Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Psalms. This is called poetry and songs, right? And then, of course, you got the New Testament. You have the Gospels. You have the history. You have the epistles, you have the general epistles, and then you have Revelation, or the end of times. So you got another 5, right? So this is how it was put together. The Gospels, all these books talk about the life of Jesus. Okay? If you want to know about Jesus and his life and how he lived and how he interacted with his disciples, then you go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They'll tell you. And all of them have different perspectives, but this is about the life of Jesus. If you want to know how the church grew and all those things, then you go to the book of Acts, because you'll get the history. If you want to see these Pauline, these epistles, these are letters written to people or churches. You see that? These are general epistles because they have the person who wrote them name is on it, except for Hebrews, of course, because we are not sure who wrote the book of Hebrews, but their name is on the book. So that's a general epistle. And of course, Revelation has to do with the end of time. So this is just a generalization of how the Bible is divided up, okay? But there's Old Testament. There's a reason that's there, New Testament. You can't see this that well, but Old Testament, this is the law of Moses when they were on the mountain. And Moses went up on the mountain. Now it was written, it's written in Hebrew and Aramaic, but it's in English because we can't read it. So it's in English. Somebody did a nice job putting it in English for us, but this is in the book. This is how we read it. So Moses went up on the mountain. He got the law of God because the children of Israel became corporate worship, became a nation. And so they needed laws. If you're going to have a nation, then you have to have rules and laws. And so the laws, you shall not have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself carved images. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, which is the seventh. This was for in the Old Testament. Honor your father and your mother. Don't murder. Notice it doesn't say don't kill. It says don't murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witnesses against your neighbor. You shall not covet. Okay, that's what was on the stone. And then you had other laws. But as you can see, these covenants are different. I'm not going to go over each one, but somebody did a great job of lining up some things, 15 points about the difference for them. And it says, for if the first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been for the second one. So that means that the old covenant is like an old will. And in that will, if your mom or parents were writing out a will for you, and they wrote out and put you in the will, and they wrote that will out, and then the sign, that will would be valid, okay? But if you grew up and you started to have children, guess who's not in the will? Your children are not in the will. So the will has to be written over. Once it is written over, then the old will is the old will. You can't go by the old will. Okay? It's not in effect. They're going to go by the new one. Okay? So we can understand that there were two different wills. That's what an old covenant, testament, will and testament, that's what this is. So we got a couple of things, the blood of animals, the blood of Christ. This was a shadow of what was coming. And so that's what this means. Shadow means just like my hand is on there. What happened to my screen? Just like my hand is on here, that's my hand on the screen is the shadow, but it's not my hand. So the Old Testament is the shadow, but the real revelation is the hand, which was Jesus. That's the New Testament that was coming. Okay? So the Old Testament is the shadow. The New Testament is the actual image of what was being projected in the Old Testament. These are some basic things. This is stuff we know, okay? This is some basic things that help us to understand, and then you'll be able to understand that some of them are the differences, all right? So I just put that up there so that you can see that as we go over some of this. So now, here's what I want to point out. Brother Whitfield, can you read Exodus 3, 11 and 12 for me?
And Moses said unto God, Who am I, that I should go unto Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt. And he said, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee, that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain.
So Mount Sinai was that mountain, and he says, I'm going to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt because they were in slavery for 400, maybe 30 years, 400 plus years. They were in slavery. They came out, God brought them out of Egypt, out of slavery, so that they can be free to serve him. Okay? That's always the principle. God brings you out of slavery so that you can serve him. He don't bring you out so you can go about your way.
That's right. That's right.
He brings you out of slavery so that you can serve him. How did they worship? This is just, these are questions I'm not got to answer it. If you want to, you can. But my thing is well, what I want to point out is that they didn't know how to worship as a nation, as a corporate worship. How did they know how to worship God? They've been slaves. Well, if you go back in the Old Testament, they built altars, personal ones. You know, there was always worship, even back to Cain and Abel, right? When they came to worship God, they brought their offering. You know, Abel brought his the fat of his flock, and Cain brought so there was worship. It's individual worship. But it wasn't this corporate law. This is how you do this. I want you to do this. This is how you do this. That's what God did after they became a nation. He told Moses, this is how I want you to worship. This is how I want the tabernacle to look. This is where I want you to place. I want you to lay the gold over the altar. I want you to see, he gave them all these instructions. But before that, it was personal. And what I'm saying today is it's still personal. Right? There's a personal aspect to worship, which we're going to get into in a few minutes. Okay? There's personal we can come together because we are commanded to do that. Right? But there is still individual worship. Somebody was trying to put their hand up, Sister Bennett. You had the baby, so I didn't think your arm on. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. That's right. They were. And what I want to point out also was that even as they had big influence, because that's part of where I'm going, from where they were in Egypt, okay? They had really big influence from the culture they were a part of, okay? They knew God, they knew there was a God, but they still had this, the culture that they were a part of. So, this is what I want to point out. There were laws that God had given them on the mountain that they already knew. Okay? And what I want to share with you is, this is always, and I try to go back as far as I could, right? I try to pick up something, go back as far as I could, that you're not supposed to covet or steal. And we see them doing that in Genesis 3:6. It's both coveting. She saw that the tree was good. That's coveting. God said, this tree, don't touch it.
That's right, because it don't belong to you.
Evil spirit got to him. That's what I'm going to call it. Evil spirit got to them. They decided, they coveted what they couldn't have. And then they stole. That caused sin.
That's right.
It was sin before the Ten Commandments. You got where I'm going with some of these? It was sin before the Ten Commandments. Lying, murder, we saw that in the Ten Commandments, and dishonoring the Father was in the Ten Commandments, but that was before the Ten Commandments. Brother Whitfield.
And Cain talked with Abel, his brother. And it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him.
That's murder. Continue.
And the Lord said unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not. Am I?
He said, that's lying. Am I my brother's keeper? I know not. He was lying. He was talking to God, his father, as God communed with them, and now he dishonored his father by taking out his brother and lying to his father. That's dishonoring his father. So that was a sin back then. It didn't just start in the Ten Commandments. Okay?
That's right.
Continue, you can read it out. Sorry.
Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground.
So we got that before the Ten Commandments was even put into place. Guess what we got? Homosexuality was forbidden. Genesis 13:13. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which was a place that practiced homosexuality. Homosexuality was a sin before the Ten Commandments.
That's right.
That's why God destroyed it. Abraham said, Lord, I can find some righteous people. And he said, well, go ahead. I can find 50. Go ahead. Well, I can't find 50. Lord, let me ask you this again. If I get 40, can I get 30? Can I get 10? And he was like, no, I got to take out. The only righteous person in there that's really been affected by it was Lot's family. So I need you to get, I'm going to get the righteous out. Because I'm getting ready to destroy the guilty. But the only reason that I'm getting Lot out is because of you, Abraham. That's family. I'm going to get him out. But it was a sin before the Ten Commandments. Okay? Sabbath. You know, the Ten Commandments keep the Sabbath holy. Brother Whitfield, read that for me.
Exodus 16:4. Then said the Lord,
Show you something.
Then said the Lord unto Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no.
And Exodus 16:26.
6 days ye shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none.
So he told them, I don't want you working on the Sabbath day picking up something. This is right before, but he was giving them some instructions. So anytime God's giving instruction and you disobey an instruction, that's sin.
That's right.
So he was preparing them. He said, I'm going to prove.
That's right.
Where's that word at? Where
Right
is
there.
it?
Third line, middle.
Middle. That I may prove them whether they will what?
Walk in my law.
God will always do that. Now, there are some principles in this Old Testament that we can follow, even though we're not under it, but God still operates the same way. He proves that you're going to follow him. So you're going to have some tests in your life. You're going to have some tests in your life that may bring you to a really, really low point, right? But you're being tested by God. That's what he's doing. He's testing you. He's proving you. Why? Because you're always going to have a battle with evil, so you might as well be prepared.
That's right.
You're always going to have a battle with circumstances and things that come in your life, so why don't you get prepared? Why fight a fight without the armor?
That's right.
I need to prepare you for it, okay? Adultery. Y'all remember that? But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, thou art but dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. That is adultery. This is Abraham. We ain't even in Egypt. But adultery was what? It's a sin. So, I'll read this. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee. This is Genesis 26:3-5, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make the seed, thy seed, to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge. He kept my commandments, kept my statutes, and kept my law. That seemed like it's redundant. And they related, but there are some charges.
That's right.
That God has for us, and commandments that are set in place. Then you have principles, the statutes, different things under that law, right? You got this, here is the law, do not commit adultery, and then he gives you some statutes under marriage.
That's right.
That make sure that the law of adultery doesn't take place. You see what I'm saying? So you got laws within the law. They call these statutes in the law. Right, breaking it down. So God has always given, he gave it to Adam and he gave it to Eve from the beginning. That moral law was instilled because Adam and Eve were created full grown. So they had to have the capacity to understand some things. Amen. They didn't have a chance to learn not to do something. It was already in them. When he gave it to them. When he created them, it was already there. He created them full grown. Just like you create all the animals, everything was full grown so it could reproduce again.
That's right.
So they didn't have time to grow. So there's some things and some statutes and some morality already, and God had already invested that in Adam and Eve. Okay? Here's where they received the law of Sinai. And Moses said unto God, who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh, that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery? And he said, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Okay? Now, here's one of the things that you're going to come up against. Music and worship. Guess where they sung music at? In 15:1-2, Exodus. Why was there singing? They just got delivered. Okay, but can you read that for me?
Then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he have triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider have he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song, and he is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him.
So we know that when they come out, they sang. Here's another part of it. Further down in verses 20 and 21. Look at how they praised him.
And Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tremble in her hand, and all the women went out after her with trembles and with dances.
Timbrels.
Timbrels, my fault. And Miriam answered them, sing ye to the Lord, for he have triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider have he thrown into the sea.
Now, the reason I brought this up, because I've had studies with folk in the church that bring up the principle that what they had was instruments. And what they say is they had the timbrels. That's the tambourines, right? I don't know if you can get them on this, that round thing?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that was like that, but I know they had them. They could have been them little ones that they cling. But they also was praise dancing. So this is where they go and get it, right? Well, what religion are they getting it from? Because guess what? It definitely ain't the Mosaic, because they didn't get there yet. You got what I'm saying? So where did they get this? They were praising God because God had what? God had delivered them. But they're going back into, it didn't even say it was worship.
That's right. That's right.
They were just happy that God had delivered them, and they was just having a good time, and Miriam was leading.